All right. We've got our last and final session, session 4, with every time we've been waiting for, harvest. All of our hard work and energy and efforts finally coming down to crunch time. So, a little bit, again, most of you guys have been to some of these sessions already. I'm Jason Peterson with Woodstock Hemp Company, and own and operate a hemp farm in Molalla. It's about 45 minutes south of here. Was also the project manager for a 500-acre hemp farm in Central Oregon, helped cultivate that with Plas from Northwest Ag Solutions. So Alan provided all the muscle for that project, all the equipment, going through and doing our combining, our laying all of our beds, and working with us to get all that harvested efficiently and effectively. And my background, again, is indoor marijuana cultivation before I moved over to the hemp space, recognizing that there was a much bigger much more room for growth in hemp, and I was kind of getting tired of working under the lights. So I've really enjoyed my time working in the hemp space and continue to do so, and look forward to growing this and educating people like yourselves, farmers, about some of the challenges and different ways that you can go about hemp cultivation, because you can really do it any way you want. It really just boils down to your size, the resources that you have at your disposal, and what you're trying to accomplish. And so that translates, directly into harvest, as it has through every aspect of the hemp farm to this point. So, basically by this time last year was the beginning of October, and over in Powell Butte, we had managed to withstand all the gophers and voles chewing our drip tape night after night. We had a plague of other irrigation system problems and leaks. We survived a hailstorm. So I don't know if you guys any of you know, but we had a really bad hailstorm come through in September in Central Oregon and wiped out, I think, about 700 acres worth of hemp in that field, in the area. Literally just stripping these things down to toothpicks in the fields overnight. I had a really good buddy of mine, a business partner, lose 80 acres like that. And so we avoided that. We had some pumps fail. We had a brush fire on one of our fields, which was a fun experience to have to try and put out. One of our flipped on the irrigation pumps to turn on the watering system, and the transformer it arced, and then a spark hit the ground, and there was dried brush there. And next thing you know, I'm looking at my hemp field sitting out there, and like between me and the hemp field, there's this brush fire that just starts up out of nowhere. I'm just like, motherfucker. So Alan's down at the other field, about 2 miles away with the water truck, and I'm like, get on the phone. I'm like, Alan, you got to get over here now, man. We got a brush fire. So luckily he sped over, and between I and a couple others, we were able to get that thing put out pretty quick. So, just another day on the farm. We had managed to survive all those obstacles, and we bled, we sweat, we laughed, we cussed, and finally the time came for us to harvest. So, the harvest, there are any number of ways to do it, whether you're doing it for biomass or for flour. We're really just kind of going to focus on those two today, and just before we, instead of going into, you can do, live resin, you can harvest stuff and then cryogenically freeze it, so then it can get the full terpene profile can get extracted later. That's like a live resin oil. It's a very niche product, but it's stuff like that we're not going to get into. We're going to focus more on the large scale, like I said, flour production, biomass production, and then kind of leave the rest off to the side. There's really no wrong way to do it. Like we said, it just boils down to your technique, equipment, machinery, resources, and whatever works really for you. So our objective here is just to always try and maximize the percentage of CBD and the volume that we have at the end of this, right? That's the end goal. That's how we're going to determine our value of the crop, is how much CBD is in it and how much do we have. And so, a good baseline is to try and get 2,000 pounds per acre of 10% CBD biomass. That's going to get us the greatest chance of turning a profit and to be able to turn that product and sell it in a quick and timely manner. So, other than that, we're looking at developing a harvest plan so that we know what it is that we're going to try and do. It's going to allow us to, like in this case, we're going to cut off the flowers, and then we're going to, shred all the other material, and then we're going to get rid of the waste, so like the stalks and the stems and all that. But we have to know what those costs are and what those inputs are going to be. So, for example, I probably touched on this earlier. we have to look at all those factors into a harvest strategy. So if I know that my combine, we've got cutting the plants down is one step of that. We've got removing the plants from the field as another step. We've got drying the plants, and then we've got removing everything from the plants. So those are basically the 4 things that we have to do: cut the plant down, pull it out of the field, pull everything off of it, and then we have to dry it. So to dry it, if we're in Central Oregon, we can field dry, which is great. We can cut them down, we can lay them down on the ground, and because it's so arid out there, they'll just dry naturally. That's how we did it out in Powell Butte. If you're on the west side of the Cascades, you're not going to be able to do that because it's too moist. So we've got 2 options. We can hang it in a barn, or we can dry it at a drying facility. So those are really the only 2 viable options. And so you got to look at, if you're drying it in a drying facility, all right, how are we going to cut it down? So we can wet combine it. We can run it through, chop the whole plant down, throw it in a combine, and then take that wet material and run it to a dryer. Or what we've seen a lot of really good experience with in the valley is bean pickers. They do really, really well. They may miss some of the lower material on the plant, but they'll get 95% of the material off of it, 90% of the material off of it. And they'll do so in a way to leave very little stick and stem in the biomass material. And then from there, you can take it and haul it over to a drying facility. You're going to lose very little CBD potency that way. Anytime you run a combine, you're probably going to lose, 3%? Yeah. So you have to look at that. Like if I'm going to use a combine to harvest my material, if I'm losing 3% and CBD is worth 50 cents a point, let's just say, that costs me $1.50 a pound just in processing that. And so let's say I've got someone that, if there's a dryer that's going to cost me 50 cents a pound and a bean picker is going to cost me 75 cents a pound to process. Well, that's going to, even though I got to pay for that drying facility, that 50 cents a pound for drying my material, well, I'm going to actually save money by doing that way because the overall cost inputs are, I'm not going to lose as much CBD, and so I'm going to be able to maximize profits by doing it that way. So it's understanding those relationships in those harvest strategies, how doing it one way versus another way is going to cost you time or save you money or cost you labor. And so that's why, if you're talking, talk to farmers, talk to consultants, talk to other growers, ask them, like, what have you done? What's worked? On the combine front, a lot of times we'll modify those. There's concaves inside of the combine. That's what you have, a rotor typically that will thresh the hemp against this screen, and those screens, we'll swap those out and put different screens in there so we get better threshing action. So we remove more of the biomass material from that plant, and then what ends up coming out the back is all the stalks and the stems, and that'll end up coming out the back of the machine. And so you're capturing all the the CBD potent stuff, and it's dumping it into the top of these combines. The problem is that's a very violent action, and a lot of times you'll lose a lot of CBD molecules just out the sides of these things. I mean, if you see them operating out in the fields in Central Oregon, you'll see just green plumes of smoke coming off the tops, and that's just all trichomes that are just getting blown off. So that's where you get that loss. So it's important, again, to understand like how all these mechanical practices, all these different touches that you're doing to this crop, how they're actually affecting it and what they're doing to it and how that's translating to your CBD and your potency. So we basically got, then we need to look at, where we're going to harvest for flower or not. So standard practice in most, large scale hemp operations is to go through your field, and you're going to take all your tops. You're going to take all your big colas, 12 inches, 8 inches at the top of all your branch. You're going to come through and cut all those off, and you're going to dry those in some sort of barn storage area where you have a nice controlled drying facility. So, and controlled, I mean, if you can have, 60 to 70 degrees, 50 to 60% humidity, you're going to, store them in there for 5 to 7 days, and that's going to get them cured down to, 15%, 18% moisture content, which is going to allow you then to trim those, buck those, and then turn those into a finished flour product. They'll need to sit once you have them trimmed in totes and for them to kind of gas off and for more of the chlorophyll to be released so that they kind of have that nice, hempy, weedy smell that everyone likes. So there's a few more steps beyond that. But that's kind of, if you're harvesting for flour, that's kind of standard practice anymore, is to go through, harvest all your tops first, since that's where you get, the greatest ROI. You've got nice big buds. You can break those apart easily, and you can trim those easily while saving the rest of the plant for your biomass. And understand that, if you start removing too much of the flour from your plant, you're really going to lower your CBD volumes in your biomass. So there's kind of a delicate balance there. So if I have, if I remove 20% of my high CBD containing material off my plant, I'm not going to have a very viable biomass product at the end. My biomass potency may be so low that no one wants to buy it. So it doesn't really do me any good to do that. What would behoove me is to like take 10% of my plant and then now still have a biomass product that I can sell. So now instead of having one product that I can and one product that I can't sell, I've got two very sellable products. So very important to keep that in mind, that when you are harvesting for flower, you're not taking everything off the plant. Unless, of course, that's what your objective is and you've got 2 acres and that's all you're doing is for a whole, you're just doing nothing but flower, you're stripping it all, that's fine. But if you're doing biomass and flower, you need to understand what the relationship is between those two and how harvesting for one can affect your results on the other. Standard, practice is really just to kind of have like either screens or like a racking system set up where you lay your buds down on them and they're laid down horizontally, or if you've got stringers or lines running across a span. So when we harvest in Molalla, we've got 64,000 square feet of barn space where we heat with natural gas, and we've got fans. They're old chicken roosts, so they're 300-foot long buildings, 40 feet wide, and we just run wires all the way down across them, and then we'll hang everything in there to dry, so that we can control that drying process, so we can get a really good smell, really good terpene profile on our finished products. And then if we'll use some of those barns for drying plants, and then we'll go through and then use our combine and throw the plants into the combine, and then we'll do another haul. So we'll harvest like a third of our field, hang everything, dry it, chop it, harvest another third, hang it, dry it, chop it, and do that throughout the entire cycle in order to get everything indoors. So again, it's important to understand what resources you have at your disposal. Tractors. Is there a drying facility nearby? Do you have trucks? What kind of labor resources do you have? Because it's a very labor-intensive process. You may want to look at, if you've got a large field and you're doing tops, meaning you're going to be harvesting those tops, that you consult with a labor crew to come in and do that work for you. So there's lots of agricultural labor crew visa workers that'll come in and do that. It's actually kind of a slower, not a slow time, but they're readily available if you're in the right particular area of the state. So in the Willamette Valley, we have access to tons of agricultural worker resources. Central Oregon, not so much. We had a problem getting people over there just because it's not a very the agricultural crops that we're growing out there are hay, alfalfa, so which one guy in a tractor can do 100 acres no problem. So there just really isn't a huge demand for any sort of contract labor work on that. So we actually had to bring over a bunch of labor workers from the Willamette Valley to come over and do work for us. So understanding that, like if you're planning for something, it would take some time for us to get workers, and we sent them. After we're done transplanting, the CEO of the company was like, okay, cool, we don't need these guys anymore. And we sent them away, and we're like, no, we need to keep these guys here because they're going to go find other work. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, we're like, hey, I need these guys back to come do some stuff for me. And it took another 2-3 weeks to get them back over there before we could find another crew. So, again, it's one of those hurdles that you just, if you didn't know, you wouldn't you wouldn't know. There's no way for you to know until it happens. So, Alan, you want to talk about some of your, some of the equipment that we use to harvest specifically, like bean pickers and combines, and how those work? And
yeah, so in the valley, the guys were using bean pickers, and what they found out is if they went slow, they could get the buds and the leaves off, but if they went fast, they pretty much pushed the plants over. Most of the guys would leave probably, like Jason said, 5 to 10% of the lower buds, just because the bean pickers couldn't get them as they pushed them over. And then they'd haul them to the dryer and get them dried and go that direction. In Central and Eastern Oregon, we're using swathers, just like we do grass seed in the valley, and we could swath them, let them field dry, and then with modifying the combines, you could combine them, and we'd have biomass ready to go coming out of the combine. So we just had to bag off of that. So that's how we did it on the larger scale as far as harvesting went.
Yeah, and those combines, I mean, the combines are big pieces of equipment, but there are companies like that to do like hauling of like heavy equipment out there. So you can get a combine out and do 20 acres or 50 acres or however many acres you needed to have done. It definitely saves a lot of time and money and resources doing it that way than doing it by hand. I mean, you can spend probably $2,000 an acre to hand harvest a crop if you were to go and try and hand buck some stuff. So it's just understanding what all those costs are going to be. And if you came to my earlier earlier session, we talked about budget. It's looking what's it going to cost me to harvest a per acre cost of hemp. Combine harvesting, I mean, last year rates were, the lowest I heard was $750. Some of the highest I heard was like $1,500. So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, I mean, if it costs me $2,000 to hand harvest an acre, but a combine is only going to cost me $1,500, there probably are a few extra costs in there, maybe a couple $100 extra for chopping the plants down. Well, maybe that's a route I'm going to go. Understanding how you're going to dry the crop is first and foremost. If you're going to maintain your CBD potency and your flavor profile and your buds, like just make sure you have a good drying strategy. Understand too how your weather can affect these plants. So we had some rain coming in at the beginning of October last year in the valley. Probably had a lot of people spooked. It molded out quite a few crops, I think, but it wasn't a huge rain event by any standards. The rest of October was totally fine. So I mean, if you were able to make it past that and you had the wherewithal to kind of run through it, and maybe not, like we let our crop ride, and we were harvesting all the way till October 25th. We had a little bit of spot mold, but don't understand that these plants typically are very resilient to kind of mold and mildew, and it's dependent on the type of strain that you're running. Like some Oregon CBD stuff isn't nearly as resilient as maybe some others out there. But depending on the type of your strain, you could work with your seed supplier to ask them, like, hey, do you think this is going to be a problem? Do you think my plants are going to be able to withstand this or not? And they'll hopefully give you an honest answer. And that's what a lot of us are here around the show right now doing, is to be able to provide that kind of input to you guys. So making sure you understand how the weather will affect your harvest. We got hit with like some 7 degree temperatures at the beginning of October out in Powell Butte, and that really cratered the plant. I mean, it basically just killed them. I mean, right there out in the field. I mean, they'll take a light frost, but 6 and 7 degrees, they're not going to withstand that. So they started dying pretty much immediately after. And so we then, it was a rush at that point to go in there and get those things taken down as quickly as possible. So we kind of had to rush that process. But that wasn't really in the forecast. We weren't expecting to get temperatures down that low at that point. So, but it's definitely, crucial to start looking at the weather forecast come the middle of September and kind of see what's coming down the pipeline, and just be prepared. Have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C. I mean, if your combine breaks down, what are you going to do? What's your backup plan? Because at that point, like, you've got to do something. I was in Powell Butte. I mean, we'd be harvesting, all night. I had my combine hired out there to do some work, so we'd be on the farm harvesting this 500-acre crop, and then when I got done at 8 o'clock, I'd have to drive 20 minutes over to this other field because my combine kept breaking down, and so I mean, I'd be up till 1 o'clock in the morning and inside this thing trying to get it fixed and get it up and running, and the guys out there, they didn't really have a very good plan B and plan C, and so I helped them formulate one, like, kind of at the last minute, but they were just freaking out. And I was just like, look, guys, like, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And so, luckily I was able to point him in a direction that worked for him and get somebody else out there to get him taken care of. But, it's having that network of people that you can call and ask when you have questions or you're running into a situation, and kind of anticipate that kind of stuff. Like, something's probably going to go wrong. I mean, it's farming, it's mechanical equipment. Something's going to break. Like, it takes time to adjust these things. I mean, you can't just take your combine right in the field and go and expect that you're going to get a very good product. I mean, it took us, sometimes it can take a week to dial in something to really get it fine tuned to the way that you want it. So, just understand that all these things take time. I mean, it's all in theory, it's all perfect, but then when you actually go out and farm it, it's a completely different story. Eisenhower has a great quote about, farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from the cornfield. I mean, that's easy. Yeah, we can do that, no problem. And then you get out there, you're like, holy shit. So, again, when it comes to harvest, there's tons of different ways to go about doing it. The important thing is just understanding what it is that you want to accomplish, and then and how you're going to do that, right? Like, I've got to get 2 acres of these plants. I've got a barn, or let's say I've got a barn this big and I've got 5 acres of plants outside. How am I going to get them in here? Well, all right, I guess I could maybe fit an acre. I could probably fit an acre and a half in here. That means that I'm going to have to harvest 2-3 times in order to get 5 acres here. So I'm going to have to harvest probably, the very end of September. I'm going to harvest early, dry those, process those, cut another round, get those hung, and then do that. So it's just kind of you're problem solving at that point. And so that's what we're here to help you guys figure out, is how to solve those kinds of problems. So. That's harvest. At the end of it, we want to get a nice consistent biomass product. We want a nice, good smokable flower. and there's any number of ways to go about doing that. And so I can't really go in. I mean, I can't really go into the specifics because we'd be here for hours and hours and hours. But again, the whole purpose of this session and this series is to kind of get you thinking about all these different ways and methodologies to go about doing the things that you want to accomplish, and then understand like the complexities and what's involved, and realistically, like, is this something that you can do on your own? Do you need help? And what kind of services and resources are you going to need? So. Any questions about harvest, specifically challenges? Then we get into the nit and gritty now.
Three questions. Make and model on a bean picker. Favorite one?
Guys were using Byron's and Pixels, so there really wasn't a favorite one. But there's not a lot of beans raised in the valley anymore, so there's bean pickers available out there. But it didn't seem to matter as long as they went slow. If they went fast, they pushed the plant over too much. As long as they went slow, it pulled most of it in with either one of the bean pickers. It didn't really matter.
Could a Category 2 tractor run it?
They're self-propelled units.
See, that shows what I know. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, like a combine.
It looks like
okay.
It looks like a combine, but it's got a different header on the front, and they're a bunch of picture rake teeth on a reel, and it spins and basically just tears it off and pulls it in and puts it in its own tote behind you.
So
and they'll be wet.
Is the end product suitable for smokable flour?
No,
Okay. It gets beat up too much.
Copy. All right.
Yeah, quality won't be there.
Okay.
And it has to go through a dry. And because it's wet, it has to go through a dryer. So once you
Sure.
start running it through the dryer, you're gonna destroy any sort of terpene profile that it would have had anyways.
So it's a biomass solution. So is it for a smaller scale farm versus a combine? Why would you choose one or the other?
So the difference being, it goes back to those four. We have to cut the plant down, we have to dry the plant, we have to get it out of the field, and we have to strip everything off of it. So the combine and the bean picker do the exact same thing. They strip the material off the plant. The combine will do it dry, the bean picker does it wet.
Right.
So
okay.
when you're doing it with a combine, you're drying the material first and then combining. On the bean picker, you're doing the inverse.
Okay.
But if you're doing with a bean picker, you have to have a dryer as well. So there's a second step to that.
So the Willamette Valley option would be the bean picker and then machine dry. Okay.
Yeah, because the combine in the valley is not going to work very often, slim to none.
And I'll just say what I saw in Roseburg was the forage harvester was what everybody was using, and just grinding up wet multi-plants. That's the last resort. For
you can
people.
absolutely do that. You could silage chop as well. If you had a really high potent product to begin with, maybe you're able to get in that 6 to 8% CBD potency, which is better than nothing. Better than letting it mold out of the vine. But yeah, if you're doing like a whole plant chop, your potency is definitely going to be really low. You could maybe try and run it over a screen after it's dried to try and remove some of that stalk and stem. There's a brush system out there that we use on the Powell Butte farm to help kind of clean up some of the biomass, where it would basically force the biomass material through a screen and then kick out all the large pieces of stalk and stem on the other end. So it would definitely be a possible solution for something like that.
I know there are a lot of Fusion CBD contracts, and they were learning the whole destem process afterwards. So that's interesting. Do you have a favorite mechanical trimmer? Can you just...
I like the Centurion Pros. I've got 3 of those, and they work really well.
Over the Twister?
Yeah.
Can you give a reason why?
Just ease of use. They're very easy, very little maintenance, and they run really well.
Okay. And just one last thing for the audience, for people that are new, I found if you're going to hang dry bud on stem flower in your barn, the tomato trellis netting from OBC Northwest was 3,000 linear feet for $300 versus the construction temporary fencing or deer fencing that people were recommending. That's more robust, but the tomato trellis was way less expensive if folks need to use that.
That's good to know. Yeah, and be aware too, like if you are hanging stuff from that, those they get very heavy, you can lose a lot of weight. So yeah, you can strip those plastic pieces down pretty quick. So don't overload them, and don't pack too many buds in. You don't want them like laying on top of each other. Give them a few inches between each one. Otherwise, yeah, they're going to mold out on you guys pretty quickly.
you don't have any plastic mulch here in this picture, so you were able to cut that with a swather. But where you had plastic mulch, that's been a problem for people cutting with swathers. We had trouble. How did you deal with that?
We had plastic, and we swathed the 3 rows at a time. And occasionally you'd have a problem if your swather tire hit, but we had the draft set on the header to keep it up. And so most of the time we didn't have any trouble with that. And then the combine would go through and we'd be on top of the plastic.
How far above the plastic did you have it set?
Oh, we got tight. Yeah.
So,
Inch and a half.
so weren't, I don't know.
Inch and a half, roughly.
Well, weren't you leaving some lower branches then? I mean,
Very little.
okay.
Yeah.
There's a video downstairs if you want to see what it looks like
Okay.
in one of our trial plots, but you can see in some of the real tight ones, you might leave this much. But if you go down anymore, you're sucking dirt and plastic, and
Sure.
you don't want dirt in your biomass
No, no.
either. So, but we cut 3 rows so that the biomass would lay on the center row,
Yep.
and then the combine would pick it up off the center row, and we wouldn't have to get it out of the dip so bad.
Did you have much trouble with wind blowing it while you had it laid down? That was the other. We had some windstorms. We had them. You're harvesting along the fence row. That you were just running the combine down the fence row.
Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but yeah, there was a few issues with that, especially in the thinner areas of some of the fields. It would blow away.
Yeah, and there were a lot of weather challenges. I think farming in Central Oregon last year, we had the freeze, and then right after the freeze, we had the rain, and then we had that wind, which was kind of really kicking for a while. And I think a lot of farmers had CBD volumes that were decreased because of just how abrasive those factors were, how much the plants got beat up. I mean, it happens. I mean, that trichome is it's a crystal structure on the outside of those buds. So every time you move it, shake it, dry it, they're falling off. So and the whole idea is to capture as many of those as possible. So that's why I think that one of the advantages to being in the Willamette Valley is that you don't have that option that you're going to wet harvest pretty much everything. And so when you wet harvest stuff, those trichomes are malleable. They're not going to break and snap, and so they're going to stay with all that other plant material. If they get smashed, they're not going to go anywhere. So there is an advantage to doing that wet harvest and then drying after the fact because you're going to capture more of those CBDs. It's probably more of expensive of a process, but again, once you start factoring in, your loss is going to be significantly less. It may actually all equal out in the end.
He discussed the black plastic mulch, and I was curious if you had any opinion on, there's a corn-based product that they say you can till in. Do you have an opinion on that?
So there is some biodegradable plastic out there now. I haven't used it. We're gonna use some this year and experiment with it. It'll be great. I mean, not having to go in after the fact and pull all this plastic out
So
is
much
great.
work.
You have to then burn it or landfill it because you can't do anything else with it. If you're doing an organic farm, you can't run the biodegradable stuff because there's no biodegradable organic options out there. So something to keep in mind. You have no choice in that regard. I hope it to be a really viable product. I'm really hoping it works because I would love to not to have to throw away and pull up all that plastic again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know a couple guys that used it, one down by Brooks, and it turned out just fine, and then one up in the hills of Silverton with the red clay. And you go out there today and you can't find it. But that was kind of our reason why we didn't want to use it, because if you go out and disc a field and you have to send a Hispanic crew out to pick up all your plastic because it didn't biodegrade. But so far, both of them, if you go out to either one of those 2 fields, you can't find anything, or very, very little that they say will still disappear.
Awesome. Thank you.
I got to interject something on that one. I know of a grower in Terrebonne who used it. It's biodegradable. It was biodegradable 4 weeks after he did it. So he had a huge mess because now he can't pick it up, and he had that stuff everywhere. It was a disaster for him.
Yeah, I have heard, depending on what the environment is that you're planting into. So they make different thicknesses of that. And so what you're supposed to do, and this is one of the reps that I've talked to about it, is that you tell them what your climate's like, and then they will make a suggestion based off of that. So they're going to look at what your GDU, your global, your daylight, what your daily average light amount is, because the light will just biodegrade that stuff like that. So you got to make sure you get one that's thick enough to withstand the elements.
This is maybe a little bit off subject, but I'm wondering, there's field testers. I got a T-check system for $500. It only, after I got it, claims it's good for CBD, THC. Well, it only tests for THC down to 1.
It's a field like an infield like cannabis oil tester.
Yeah. And then there's the $25,000 model downstairs.
Is that by Big Sur?
Yeah, and I've only got a 2.5 acre field, so is there anything that
Don't-
you know of somewhere in between?
Is the Big Sur rep in here right now? That machine is garbage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's.
Whoa.
I can test grass, literal grass, and have it test at 6% CBD.
No. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can test juniper, 6% CBD. It is
So there isn't
fucking
any
garbage. Don't buy it.
So there's nothing cost effective that you. Don't buy it. Okay.
Yeah, no, you can. There's no accurate in-house testing that you can do. I mean, you need an HPLC, you need an HPLC machine. It's high pressure liquid chromatography. That's going to give you the greatest accuracy.
So then, for especially the new farmer or anybody else who's really just worried or concerned, just doing an R&D test.
Testing's cheap. I mean, R&D tests, $95. That's nothing. I mean, it really is nothing. You can mail that in. I mean, it seems like a lot. I mean, it probably seems like a lot for a test, but I mean, it really isn't.
And so for an R&D test at $95 and you're growing an acre or 2 acres, that's one thing, but what if you're growing 100 acres? Is it still an RT?
No, I mean, at that point, if you're, and that's, that was with this product, then then you have an in-house, chemist, and you have an HPLC machine, and it's worth, right? Because and then it's worth me knowing I can do so many different tests in field. There's so much more data that I can collect, and not only that, but then I can, now I can have a tool that I can, if I know other farms, I can test their stuff too, and I can do testing for them. If I'm doing R&D testing for them for less expensive than what they can get at a lab for, maybe they come to me and do that. So no, if I was doing 100 acres. Off year one, I probably wouldn't invest in it, but I mean, if I was going to do it year after year, I would for sure. So we tried to do that last year in Palo Butte with infrared aerial imagery. So we would try and get an IR signature, and the infrared didn't have any detect. I would imagine you could do it with drones. I mean, there's no reason why. I mean, if you were able to fly at a slow enough speed and watch it well enough that, yeah, you could identify which ones were males. I would imagine you would have to have an army of drones out there to do it. Yeah. No, I haven't. No, yeah. So.
Just a schedule question. You've said a couple times that this is the final session. The program says you're doing another at 4:30 on selling. Are you?
I did one yesterday on selling.
It says today.
Oh, then maybe they have that wrong. I had one yesterday. Oh, I guess I can do it again. Okay, I'll take a look. I'll have a talk with the event staff. Thought I was done. I'll figure that out. Yeah, I think I'm done. Yeah.
You had made mention of mold-resistant strains. Do you have a recommendation for the Willamette Valley?
Yeah, I can recommend. Come see me afterwards, and I'll make some
perfect.
recommendations
Thank
too.